Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Blair, also known as Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, February 28th. It is Combine Week in the NFL in Indy. This is episode 274 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. 2 days left in February, today, tomorrow, and then March begins, and the offseason really takes off from there. Today, I'm joined by New York Jets analyst and content creator, Matt O'Leary. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. How's it going, man?
Doing good, as we were saying before we got started. Never a dull day, never a dull moment in
Yep.
Jets land. So
Yep.
always keeping us busy. You gotta love it.
Yep. Yeah. Never a dull moment. Typical Wednesday combine week, as you mentioned. And we've got a lot of news. So we'll start with that. We'll get into some of the McCall Harmon drama. You obviously got Deion Dawkins as well from Buffalo talking, the other day. I wanted to get your impressions here early on before we get into the offensive line, all the needs, your overall takeaways from Douglas's press conference today in Indianapolis.
Yeah, he didn't really give away a whole lot, which is kind of expected, right? Like
Mhm.
they talked about the offensive line is going to be a need, and naturally that's going to that seems obvious. They're going to wait on Elijah Vera Tucker to decide where he's going to play in 2024. I think that's the right move. I think you see how free agency and the draft falls before you make that decision. You get your five guys in here and then decide where you want each one of those guys. And then the last thing was kind of an obvious one too. We knew it was coming, but Zach Wilson going to be looking for a trade. His agent has been given permission to seek a trade, and that was something else we knew was going to happen. So, not a whole lot of new information, but kind of just confirming what we already knew about this offseason going into it.
Yeah, nothing too surprising, without a doubt. I totally agree with you there. Typical stuff from Douglas, and you wait and see what they do here in the coming weeks in free agency. But I wanted to start there with the offensive line, like you said. Talked about AVT not wanting to move him around. Salah also mentioned that at the end of the season. Now they hope that can limit the injuries without him moving around. When you look at this offensive line, some of this conversation was whether or not they would potentially have Lincoln Tomlinson take a pay cut or just simply move on from him. And Monday night, they did move on from him. So to start there, what was your reaction on that? Tomlinson, a guy that plays every single game, but unfortunately never got to that guy he was in 2021, where he made the Pro Bowl and the reason they signed him to a 3-year deal. What was your reaction to that move?
Yeah, I think it was something that needed to be done, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the Jets really had two options with him. They could either cut him or restructure him. They could not, under any circumstance, bring him back to play on an $18 million cap hit in 2024. That's just way too high of a number for someone who, as you mentioned, was underperforming. So I understand some fans are a little bit concerned about moving on and now definitely having to fill three new offensive line spots. You're bringing back AVT and Joe Tippmann as starters, but besides that, you have three new holes. And, I kind of like this interior offensive line group in free agency. So I'm not opposed to adding one or two bodies there. And I think that's the right way to do it. Yes, it's scary moving on from someone who at least gives you the reliability of playing every week, but when it's below average play, really you're kind of just setting yourself up for failure if you're going to say we're comfortable running that back. So I'm glad that they made this decision and moved on.
Yeah, if Tomlinson was playing at the level he was in 2021, he would have been a great signing. And every week there, obviously, had the 13 different offensive line combinations, was the one stabling force. You had to move on, even if they brought in a better left tackle alongside him and you got more out of the center position with Tippmann staying healthy for the entire year. That could have helped them a little bit, but I agree. You had to move on. You had to cut ties. And like you mentioned, the interior offensive line market, you can get a lot better options for a lot cheaper. Who are some guys on the top of your list in free agency that they could potentially bring in to fill out the interior offensive line? And then to add on to that, where do you feel AVT will end up, which obviously impacts both tackle and guard?
Yeah, so that's kind of I think we're going to get a better idea after free agency. Number one, where AVT is going to play, and then number two, what they're going to do in the draft. Like everyone's assuming that they're going to take offensive linemen at pick 10. I still think more than likely that's the route that they're going to go. But on the interior, some names that I like: Graham Glasgow from Detroit, really versatile piece, plays right guard, left guard, center. He's a little bit on the older side, but I think again would be significantly cheaper, a 2-year deal, maybe in that $6 to $8 million range, which is less than half of what it would have cost to keep Lake and Tomlinson. You can go for the big swing and go for a Zeitler or someone like that. I think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for the Jets to do, but Ezra Cleveland's a name to keep an eye on at guard. He was someone who was available on the trade market that I would have liked the Jets to potentially sign. And as you mentioned with AVT, my prediction, I think he ends up at tackle. This has been talked about online a lot this week, it feels like, where AVT is going to end up. Some people are worried about him playing at tackle because that's where he got hurt the last 2 years. I don't really view it that way. Like, I understand, yes, technically he was at right tackle both times in Denver, but two very different injuries. Achilles could have happened anywhere on the field at any time. Maybe you could sell me on the tricep one being because he was at tackle, but more of the story, he's played both positions well. And I think it's probably easier to fill out the roster on the interior and then go into 2024 with AVT as a tackle and a rookie as your other tackle. I think that's probably the route they end up going.
Yeah, fortunately for AVT, we'll get Denver at home this year, and he won't have to worry about going out there, which has obviously been very unlucky, and two freak injuries, as you mentioned. So those are some of the free agency stuff. When you look at the tackle through the draft, you've obviously got Latham, Fuaga. Most are the 3-4 on many people's list at 10, assuming Alt and Fashanu go earlier within the first 9. What is your rankings for the offensive tackles? And then Fuaga, Latham are all there. Who are you taking at 10, assuming Fashanu and Alt are off the board as expected within the first 9?
Yeah, I think Joe Alt, I think, is the best tackle in the class. I think he has no shot to make it to the Jets. I do think there's a world where only one tackle goes in the first 9 picks. And if one of those two guys were to fall, I think it would be Fashanu, which would be my pick if he's there at 10 over the other guys but that you mentioned. But it's not crazy to say that, both those guys deserve to be top 9 picks and not be on the board when the Jets are selecting. And if that's the case, I would be running up for Fuaga. I think he is a plug and play caliber starter at right tackle. I love the tenacity in which he plays. And it's very obvious if you watch his tape, like how good he is in the run game, but I think he's underrated as a pass blocker. Like, obviously not at the same level as an Alt or a Fashanu. Fashanu, in my opinion, is the best pass blocker in this draft class at the tackle spot. But I would love an addition of Fuaga, and I don't really look at it as, the Jets have to settle for the third tackle in this class. To me, he's worthy of a top, half of the first round selection, so I'd be good with that. JC Latham scares me a little bit, if I'm being completely honest with you. I know every single prospect's different, but he's a bigger prospect, carries a lot of weight, and maybe it's just, recency bias because of what happened with Mekhi Becton. I wouldn't want to take that risk again. I'd want to go with what, in my opinion, would be more of the sure thing. Yes, Latham has a significantly high ceiling, but I also think he has a really low floor because of, that size. Like, it's just very rare we see tackles come in at his height and weight and have long-term sustainable success without injury at this level. So that scares me a little bit. Of the two, I would definitely go with Fuaga.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the high ceiling, low or high ceiling, low floor with Latham. Another guy in this draft that some people have talked about, and assuming maybe the Jets trade back, don't get Fuaga, is a guy like Amarius Mims. A lot of people label him as a high ceiling, but you really don't know where the floor is. Could be as low as just dropping. High ceiling could be as low as maybe the best tackle that comes out of this draft, some believe. The limited number of games at Georgia concerning the injuries, concerning, but when he's out there, he makes an impact, athleticism off the charts. What is your impression on Mims, and would you be upset if the Jets, or would you be okay if the Jets maybe trade back and come away with a Mims high ceiling, but you really don't know where the floor is in this first round?
I'd be intrigued by it. Like you said, in a trade back scenario, like if they stay put at pick 10 and take him there, I wouldn't like that. I think that'd be a reach. But if you're telling me you move back to, I don't know, we move back 6 spots, pick up a second rounder and whatever else, and you take him, my intrigued, but also a little bit concerned because, like you said, that's a very high variance player.
Yeah.
He hasn't played a ton, which does scare me a little bit. Injury is definitely a concern in this draft class. I think my preference for Joe Douglas's plan this offseason would be going for the higher floor guys in both free agency in the draft because they need these guys to be an immediate impact day one player. It might take some guys a few years, like if 3 years from now, maybe Mims develops into, or Latham develops into the best tackle in the class. It's a possibility, But I'm not willing to take that risk or that gamble and say this is the better pick because in 2026 he'll be better than what a Fuaga or Fashanu, whoever else would be right away. I think with how the Jets position themselves with Aaron Rodgers, they need to capitalize on this window. So for me, I'd be drafting for who can get me the best impact right now.
Yeah, totally agree. And you can't have that low floor come into play similar to Becton where they deal with injuries and they never pan out to what they are. And you have Rodgers running all over the place, which is obviously not what this team needs. When you look at some of the interior options through the draft, you've got Christian Haynes, Christian Mahogany from Boston College, even Jax Powers Johnson, I know center, but has shown the willingness to play guard at times at the Senior Bowl. What is your impression on those guys? And I think Haynes at the top of a lot of people's list, but any other guys that you like? I know Dominic Pooney, Zach Zinter, although the injury with him in the Big Ten championship game certainly hurts his stock. But any other guys that stick out to you on the interior offensive line market in the draft?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of really good ones. I like Zinter. I think he's someone who probably would have been in the second or third round, but now is probably looking like a fourth round pick because of that injury. I do think there's a chance that he's someone who he might be good to go at the start of this year after that injury, but you are taking that gamble. But my hope is if you were drafting someone like that, you've already filled out your initial starters, and then someone like Zinter would be someone who can maybe take over for a veteran in a year or two and sit behind a vet for a couple years before being pushed into the starting lineup and building the offensive line that way. Powers Johnson, I love. I think he's going to be a first round pick now. I think someone's going to take him in the first round at center. Of the other guys you listed off, I think Haynes is really one of my favorites. When I do mock drafts, he's someone that often, I take with that pick 72 for the Jets in the third round. And if he's there and the Jets are coming away with an offensive tackle at pick 10, and then someone like Haynes in the third round, they're going to go a long way to fixing this offensive line. So I would say he's probably my favorite of the crop who could potentially be there for the Jets in the third.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see how it all plays out and where Joe Douglas goes and puts his pieces into place and finds a way to rebuild this thing. When you look over to the receiver position, help is desperately needed for Garrett Wilson. Now, I know a lot of people saw Marquez Valdez-Scantling got released today. I don't think many people want him. That feels a lot like an Alan Lazard 2.0. Rodgers' friend, don't love it. I think most people would agree. But what are some free agent options? You've obviously got Higgins getting tagged. I don't see a world where they tag and trade him or the Jets trade for him after the tag. Any other free agents? It seems like the Devontae Adams stuff in the Raiders is starting to die down. He believes in Antonio Pierce, wants to stay there out west. What are some names in the free agent market that you like as a number two pairing alongside Garrett Wilson?
Yeah, I think Calvin Ridley might end up being the best available when it's all said and done. Like I know there's some big like Michael Pittman. I'm unsure if he hits the market. I think the Colts have a young quarterback. They're going to do whatever they can to keep him around. Mike Evans. It feels like that's a name that just gets talked about every single year, but I don't know. It's hard for me to see him somewhere else than Tampa Bay. Maybe that's the case, but I think his price is going to be astronomical, and if he hits the market, so Ridley might be their best free agent option. I know you didn't mention potential trade. You mentioned Adams, but I'm with you. I don't think that's happening. But a guy like Cortland Sutton, if he's available out of Denver, I'd be intrigued by that. I don't think he'd be super costly. He has a relatively favorable cap hit as well over the next couple of years. And I think would complement Garrett Wilson well. And that doesn't stop you from continuing to draft at that position on day 2 and day 3 to continue to round out that room. But yeah, I think Joe Douglas is going to have to be a little bit creative here because, T. Higgins and Pittman and Evans and, the guys who many would have assumed like, oh, these are going to be the top of the class guys. I'm not sure how many actually are available. In my opinion, I think Calvin Ridley probably ends up as the best of the bunch that's available. And I would love that one too, man. That's just a lot of speed and route running from those two guys.
Yeah, ideally you pick one up from free agency and you also look at the draft. Now, most likely the Jets are going to go tackle, as we mentioned. But when you look at some of the middle rounds, there's a lot of intriguing wide receiver prospects that I like. Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson, Malachi Corey, Brendan Rice. What are your thoughts on some of those guys and any other potential names that you like middle rounds where you bring in a free agent as 2 and then you bring in a third receiver in those middle rounds?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of good ones that jump out to me. Roman Wilson's a favorite of mine, and after his Senior Bowl performance, I don't think he's making it to 72 where the Jets
Yeah.
are picking. I think he's probably a second round pick. But who knows? Maybe the Jets trade back and they get a second round pick, and then you're suddenly in that boat to where you could potentially draft that guy. I'll give you another name too. Malik Washington out of UVA. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but kind of like a gadget player, I think would be interesting to add that dynamic to this offense. Yes, you have, Xavier Gibson, but I don't think you should only go into this season with him as that lone, really like, okay, like this is the slot guy. I think you could find creative ways to use these guys. And he's another one that would fit on my list, probably somewhere around the 4th round. I would think he goes.
So if the Jets don't go tackle, let's say at 10, Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze are probably the top 2 receivers in this draft, many believe. Who do you like out of that group? And would you take an Adunze? Would you take a Brock Bowers as a luxury pick there? Out of those names, like who do you like, assuming they go luxury pick? Maybe they're at 10 if they feel they address the tackle through free agency.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting, right? If that's the route that they go. I'm okay with Brock Bowers. Honestly, I know that a lot of people, some people just dismiss it. Oh, you can't take a tight end that high.
Yep.
That's not really what he is. He's such a versatile chess piece. You could line him up as a big slot, and he could make plays. And the Jets' offense is just really bad. And adding more talented weapons and unique players like a Brock Bowers, I think I would be in on it if they somehow fix the offensive line, at least the tackle spot in free agency. My favorite of the 3, like I wish Neighbors would be there, but I don't think that's something that's going to happen. And I'm not convinced Roma Dunze is there. I think there's a strong chance that he goes somewhere in the top 9 as well. I think Bowers, of that group that you just listed off, probably has the best chance to get to the Jets at 10 if he doesn't go to the Chargers at 5. So I guess my answer would be him, but I mean, theoretically, I'd love all 3 of those guys on the Jets because I think they're, each one's a little bit different, but certainly improve the floor of what this offense can be.
Yeah, it would certainly be interesting if that does happen. I highly doubt it. I think they'll definitely go tackle, but it makes for some very interesting draft night conversations as they get closer to that 10th overall pick as to who they might take if they do go the luxury pick route. So moving on here to backup quarterback before we switch on over some things on the defense side of the football. Most likely you're going to bring in a veteran, Jacoby Brissett. There's been some reports that there's a liking of Sam Howell within the building, that they feel that he could sit for a little bit, learn from Rodgers, and maybe be the future, or maybe he's the guy. I don't know. It probably won't happen. But what are some veteran guys? Tannehill, and then 2, some guys that maybe they could look at through the draft as developmental picks to come and sit behind Rodgers and start in the future.
Yeah, so I think my favorite, and it's a little bit of a chalk answer, but Jacoby Brissett, I think, is the best available backup quarterback that I would want for the Jets. I understand the allure of Sam Howell, but there's some things from his game that scare me a little bit. Like, he takes a lot of sacks, and I get it. Washington's offensive line wasn't great, but as we saw watching Zach Wilson and some of these quarterbacks, like sometimes the quarterbacks just aren't seeing the field. They hold on to it too long and they get sacked. Like, offensive line play is a factor for sacks, but so is quarterback play. And I think too many times there were instances of him creating his own sacks. Also throws a lot of interceptions, man. I think he has 22 career interceptions in 18 starts. That's a lot. And Jacoby Brissett has like 23, I want to say, in his entire career in like an additional 40 games. So my preference for a backup quarterback, give me the boring guy who's going to go out there and not turn the ball over and just completely manage a game. I don't really love the high variance backup quarterbacks. They just did it with Zach Wilson. It didn't work out. But that's another reason why I like someone like Jameis Winston doesn't really move the needle a ton for me, because he's someone who could go out there and lose you a game because you could just throw it away. Yes, he has a significantly higher ceiling, and Howell probably has a higher ceiling than Jacoby Brissett does too. But give me the guy who's going to throw for a $180, 200 yards, a touchdown, and not turn the ball over. I think if he was the Jets quarterback this year, they'd probably win 10 games or a playoff team. So that would be my preference. And then in the draft, I really like the kid out of Tulane, Michael Pratt. He's probably a 3rd, 4th round pick in that range. Has the ability to run, use his legs a little bit. Two others, Spencer Rattler and Jordan Travis. Travis injured, so he's someone who, might be a fourth round pick, but probably should have gone higher if he wasn't there, with the injury. And Rattler, a little bit controversial, right? Like he was one time considered like a really great quarterback prospect and a first round pick and just bounced around in college. And, there's some potential concerns with character, but there's an immense amount of talent there. And I think if he goes to the right circumstance, he's, someone who could potentially make it as a quarterback not in the first round that develops into someone who could start. Like all quarterbacks are dart throws anyway, and after you get out of the first round, it becomes that much more difficult. So you kind of just got to latch on to a trait that you like and hope it works.
Yeah, my hope is that all these years the Jets taking quarterbacks high, this would be finally the time where they find their answer in these middle to late rounds where nobody really expects it. But yeah, you're spot on with Rattler, a guy that many thought could win the Heisman, could be the first overall pick, all these great things, and dealt with some adversity, which, the character is a problem, but you hope that some of that adversity helps him come to the NFL where he knows how to handle and knows how to overcome some of that, because it's obviously definitely going to happen in the NFL as a young quarterback. So that's the offense. A lot needs to be done on the offense side of the football. When you move over defensively, there's not a lot of holes there. One of the best defenses in football. You'd like to keep it as together as possible. The one biggest name, though, is Bryce Huff. Tag is not going to happen. Douglas said today that they had some productive conversations. Do you see Bryce Huff returning? I think there is a sense of not much optimism around the fan base. Now, the salary cap increasing could help that case. What do you see? Is Bryce Huff in a Jet uniform come week one?
I don't think so. And that's going to really bother me. Like, I am one of the leaders of the Jets should sign Bryce Huff. I get it. They just used the first round pick on Will McDonald. He might be expensive. Like, I understand all those things. They rotate a lot. Good edge rushers are really, really hard to find. The Jets went forever without having a good edge rush for years, even when their defense was great. A lot of it was, because of interior pressure and exotic blitzes during the Rex Ryan era and stuff like that. And to me, in my opinion, I think Huff is the Jets' best edge rusher. But if I had to guess, I think with just how things have gone and how the Jets have handled it, I think he's going to test open market, get a pretty nice payday somewhere, and produce in a bigger role, which is something that maybe the Jets don't see for him.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that's going to be the direction. You mentioned Will McDonald. Jermaine Johnson, we saw take a huge year two leap. Will McDonald, still an unknown, was still a very questionable pick. Jets fans, I don't think, are going to fully like that pick until he finally produces. Do you see Will McDonald taking that year two jump and potentially filling the shoes of Bryce Huff like Jermaine Johnson was able to do in 2023?
I definitely think he can get better and improve. I hope he makes that same kind of leap from year one into year two. That's a big ask because Jermaine Johnson went from very little playing time to playing at a really high level this year.
Yeah.
Every single prospect is different, right? Like growth is not, you can't say, oh, this player grew this way, so it's going to be an exact replicate of for Will McDonald. Hard to say, but I do think he's someone, if Bryce Huff stays or goes, like there's going to be opportunities there. I don't anticipate Michael Clemens getting nearly as many snaps in 2024. Carl Lawson's going to be gone. So I think regardless, he gets a better role. I think he grows. It's just going to be dependent on how much. Am I going to bet on him being an 8-sack plus guy this year? Probably not. I think that's asking a lot, but can he be a productive situational pass rusher in year two? Yeah, I think that's probably a fair expectation for him.
Yeah, hopefully he can make a jump and produce at, a solid level. And, it's obviously a lot, like you said, to ask for him to do what Jermaine Johnson did in year two, which was a huge year. So two quick questions here. Going back offensively for 1 second before we get into some of the comments made by former Jet and then a guy in the division. Corey Davis, there's been a little bit of fire around him potentially returning. We heard yesterday Connor Hughes was on the Jake Asman show talking about how if the Jets would have been in conversation or would have been that playoff or would have been in playoff contention against the Browns, Corey Davis would have probably came back. Do you see Corey Davis coming back? And if so, how do you think he can slot in? Do you feel that would maybe take the need away from having to draft a receiver in the middle rounds? You can go out there, bring in a free agent, bring Corey Davis back and trust him as your 3. If he does come back, how would you feel about him slotting in?
Yeah, it would have to be a lot cheaper than the first deal that he was on with the Jets. And I don't think, like, if they sign Corey Davis, I'm not going, okay, wide receiver 2, that's filled, and we're all good there. He just missed a year. And who knows what it's going to be like transitioning and getting back into the game at that point after missing that much time. I would welcome him back, but it would have to be like a cheap 1-year flyer where he's, maybe best case your fourth receiver on the depth chart. That's not going to stop me from going out and continuing to add at the position. But it's an interesting thought, an interesting idea. Like, I thought he was an okay Jet. I don't think he was, phenomenal. I don't think he exceeded that contract, but he also had some pretty big moments with this team. So I'd welcome him back at the right price, but I don't think that then stops you from continuing to add at the position.
Yeah, so then one more thing here. This goes into the category of never a dull moment with the Jets. So you earlier this week, you get the Deion Dawkins comments about the whole incident with Michael Clemens, about how he hates everybody on the team, hates the organization. And then you also get the comments made by McCole Harmon yesterday about his time with the Jets, and then Joe Douglas reacted to those. So just what was your reaction to both of those comments? And then two, the McCole Harmon thing, I think, picked up even more substance because of the potential tampering where he was talking to Kansas City, telling him to get him. And then you see Kenny Yeboah, see Sauce on Twitter talking about how he might have leaked that game plan against Philly. So what was your impression on both of these things? Jets are always finding ways to make headlines.
Yeah, it's always something with
Yep.
this team for Dawkins. I think the best way to shut him up is by beating the Bills. And,
Yep.
they split with them the last 2 years. Rivalries are good for the game. I get all that. But, the reality is the Bills have won the division and owned this division for a long time now. The only way to get them to stop is to, shut them up by your play on the field. Like, I don't know if the pushing and shoving down 32-6 really solves anything. So, I think that's the route that the Jets are going to have to go in order to get that to stop. And for Hardman, like, I don't know, some of the things that he said, like, I get it. The offensive staff isn't very good.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you're checked out in week 4, not returning punts because you're upset that Xavier Gibson beat you out, and then potentially leaking offensive game plans to opponents, like, I don't know how much sympathy I'm really going to have for you. So it might be tough for him to find a job in the NFL after this comes out, because I don't know too many teams who are going to want to take a chance on a wide receiver 5 that has potential character flaws.
Yeah, and I know he caught the game when he touchdown against the Super Bowl or in the Super Bowl, which is huge. But I mean, he almost lost in that game against Buffalo too. It isn't a guy that's some stud star receiver either. And like you mentioned, a lot of the stuff he said was true about the staff. We've known that, came out in the Athletic article, but the tampering, leaking the game plan, not exactly what you want to see, especially like you mentioned for his next destination. So a lot of news as always with this team. It's only February, still got a lot more to go. So to close things out, where can everybody find you, all your content? And thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Over at Matt O'Leary NY on YouTube and all social media, just talking about the New York Jets. I like to keep it fun and light. It's always, as we said a few times on the show, it's never a dull day. So check it out.
Yep.
We're always talking something New York Jets.
Yep. There's one thing that you cannot complain. This team does give us a lot of content. There's not many days where you're searching for stuff to talk about because it usually comes pretty natural. So that'll do it for an episode of In the Trench with Gang Green. Stay tuned. More content coming your way. As always, hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for tuning in.